Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michon Boston.
And I'm Taquiena Boston.
We're your hosts and real-life sisters who binge on historical drama.
We'll talk about films, fictional adaptations, and dramatic series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
So fill your teacup or mug with your favorite sip as we explore what's fact, what's fiction, and the so what on historical drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michon Boston.
And I'm Taquiena Boston. It's summertime, time for reading and watching historical drama on binge mode. In this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, we're talking about 5 books we're reading that have been adapted from page to screen, including dramatic films, musicals, and dramatic series.
We chose these 5 books because not only are they great reads, but we're also giving you a sneak peek at upcoming podcasts for Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters after our summer hiatus.
Last summer, we asked our mailing list subscribers to select the summer book and film from 3 titles: Jane Austen's Persuasion, Mr. Malcolm's List, which was adapted by Suzanne Allain, who also wrote the screenplay for the feature film, and Paul Gallico's Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, which our subscribers selected as the book and film for the summer.
This year, we're leaving it up to you to decide what you want to add to your reading and historical drama watch list from the titles we're talking about. So settle in with your favorite sip and chew as we preview our 5 selections from page to screen coming this fall in 2024 and streaming now.
All the books in this podcast are available for purchase from our affiliate bookstore using the links on our webpage, michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters. So let's get started. Michon, you've got the first book, Daisy Jones and the Six.
I see my bookmark there too. Daisy Jones and the Six. This book was published in 2019. It's by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It was a book club selection for Reese Witherspoon's book club. And it's a story that's set in the 1960s and 1970s, but it actually starts in the 1990s. The structure of the novel is more like an oral history. You get the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But for me, this is a story about creative partnerships and how sometimes what makes great creative partnerships don't always make great long-term intimate partnerships. Daisy Jones and Billy Doon have an onstage chemistry with the music, and in some ways with each other. Well, in many ways with each other. That's where that should end, but there's that tension that continues on, and in some ways it's creating a toxic work environment. So what I like about this story is that it begins where the band ends. The band has split up. We know what happened, but why did it happen? And this is how I actually like storytelling. I have no problem knowing the ending. I'm more interested in the journey. And to be honest, when I saw that this was coming to Amazon, I didn't stream it at first. I went to the book first. And then I started streaming to see what happened. And now, in some ways, they're kind of morphing into each other. But what I see in the series, and in some ways the book too, it parodies all those tell-all books from former pop musicians or persons who were in groups, who were in bands, the music documentaries, that VH1 series, Behind the Music, where the band members are telling their story in their distinctive voices from the way they remember it. That's all the oral history in the book. So if what I'm going to do is describe the story, but you might hear me morphing, as I said, the series and the book, because the series does keep pretty much to the book. I mean, there's some changes, and I'll talk about that in a second. In the series, Daisy is played by Riley Keough, who in real life is Elvis Presley's granddaughter. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, yeah. So Daisy is a girl coming of age in Los Angeles in the late 60s. And, her parents aren't interested in parenting. They have, they're fabulous. They're too fabulous for that. So she basically is left to her own devices. She has to raise herself, essentially. And you see her sneaking into clubs on the Strip, Sunset Strip, sleeping with rock stars and dreaming of singing at the Whiskey A Go-Go. So all this is all fun and games and thrilling, but she loves music. She does love music, and she's writing music as well. And by the time she's 20, she's getting noticed. And, she has charisma. She has a look that's, attracting people to her, attracting people to the music. And then there's the band, The Six, which is really starting out in Pittsburgh, and it's led by what is often described as brooding frontman Billy Dunne, who's played by Sam Claflin. They finally leave Pittsburgh. They go to LA. They have to. That's where it's happening. And his girlfriend Camilla comes along. And as soon as they get their first tour, Billy kind of stumbles into the life, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, as we just said. But at that time, Camilla becomes pregnant, just as they're about to leave on the tour. And they get married. He wants to do the right thing. Bottom line, Billy wants to do the right thing. But he goes a little wild off the wheels. The wheels kind of fall off his bus, so to speak. And after that tour, he goes into rehab to get himself back together and become the father and husband that he wants to be and what Camilla deserves. So, but Daisy and Billy do cross paths with a producer, Teddy Price, who's played by Tom Wright in the series, who realizes that their success is going to be putting those two together. They're both songwriters. And then what happens next becomes legend. And so the story begins where it ends, where the band comes apart. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the changes from page to screen. And I don't think if you read the book, you're going to be too disturbed by it. Some people get married to books and they want to see the same thing they read in the book into in the adaptation. But it works, what they've done. I think they emphasize the relationships more than what do you want when you become a musician? So here's some of the changes. The timeline is adjusted a bit. Some characters have name changes, like Warren, the drummer, gets a new last name. Other characters are morphed into one, like the tour manager, or are just dropped from the book, as we go into the series. The series added a queer love story for Daisy's friend Simone Jackson, who's played by Nabia B, and Simone is on a disco stardom track. So we're talking about the 70s again. Also, the book prints the lyrics. The book has the lyrics to the songs, but in the series, you get the music. The music is now hugging the lyrics and put together. Other things like documents that you can read in the book, like letters, they have to be transformed to something visual for a series. So you have personal video messages. And it's hard to see the content of a letter, after all, on a device. If you're watching this on your iPad or even iPhone or it's, Android, whatever you use to watch content that you stream. And the person who's collecting all this is Camilla, who is the wife, and she, wife of Billy, and she's not a photographer in the book. She's a photographer, a videographer, or she has film. It's filmed then. She's collecting the stories. Of course, the film, they add recreations of stock footage from TV and variety shows to make this look like real. If anyone's seen Spinal Tap, these mockumentaries, as they call them, it brings it all together and tells the story of how this band came together and how they split apart. So Daisy Jones and the Six, fiction made real. I hear that it was, or the author got her inspiration from the story of the real life band Fleetwood Mac. And it's an ensemble cast. And some of the characters that stood out for me in it include Karen, who is the keyboardist, who's played by Suki Waterhouse. And she gets into a relationship with Billy's brother, Graham Doone, who's played by Will Harrison. So Karen, I can tell Karen is about the music. She shows up for her sound checks on time. Karen knows the music. She's dependable. You could tell she was a trained musician. She's not in this for the fame and the parties, but she's also sociable. But Karen is also a woman doing this at a time where, regardless of women's liberation, there's still limitations on her in terms of having a personal life and a professional life. And her music, I think, is more important to her. So Karen, I think, is a relatable character, especially for a lot of young women today. And I thought that she was interesting, and both in the book and in the series. Also, Camilla Dune, the wife. I mean, she's more than just a stand by your man wife. And I'm not throwing shade at Tammy Wynette, but she can read the room, and she's the one who really encourages this collaboration between her husband and Daisy because she sees potential. She sees potential in people that people can't see themselves. And one character I related to was the touring manager, Rod Reyes, who's played by Timothy Oliphant. He has to make things work, and you don't even notice that he's making things work. You know, he intercepts the people who want to pass, the drugs to the musicians, which will not get them to the show. He's the one who has to call the doctors that he has positioned all over the country in case there is a problem that no one needs to know about, i.e. someone has a toothache. So the doctor knows what that's code for. And this is a person that has to keep it going. So I guess what I love are the characters who are the true adults. And maybe this is a story about adulting as well. I also want to mention in closing about Daisy Jones and the Six that the showrunners include Will Graham, who was one of the showrunners for A League of Their Own, the Amazon series, which we've talked about on this podcast. So that's a book report about Daisy Jones and the Six. My recommendation, you can stream it now on Amazon Prime. You could read it now wherever you purchase books, hopefully from us, so now affiliate bookstore, or read it in the library. So Taquiena, you're next, and you're going to introduce.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk
I got all
about
the books here.
Pachinko.
Okay.
Which is a novel by Min Jin, or the book title will say Min Jin Lee. This was a book that I read in early 2022, though it was published in 2017. And it is Min Jin Lee's second novel that opens in the early 1900s, where the main character is Sunja. And Sunja is the adored daughter of a fisherman. He is disabled. And as a teenager, she falls in love with a wealthy stranger that she meets at the seashore near her home in Korea. And this is a man who he promises her the world. They become intimate. She becomes pregnant and then discovers that he is married. However, as luck would have it, when another stranger, a young man who is, I guess he would be like a Christian missionary. He's Korean, but he and his family live in Osaka, Japan. He stays with the family. They nurse him back to health. He sees Sunja's situation and he decides to marry her. And so when you read the book, what you are really reading is the saga, a multi-generational saga that starts with Sunja in Korea and takes you to Osaka. And this is during the time when the Japanese are occupying Korea and basically importing workers to do the kinds of jobs that the Japanese didn't want to do. That can sound kind of familiar to our situation here in the United States these days. And so Sunja ends up going to Osaka with her husband, Isaac Bake, and lives with her her brother-in-law and her sister-in-law in Osaka. And interestingly, she does encounter her first love again in Osaka, where he is a wealthy businessman. And his family is there in Japan. His quote unquote legal family is also there in Japan. And though she does not want his help because the child her first child is a son, and this man has no sons, he only has daughters, he wants to be part of his son's life. So it is a profound story, and I think that's why Apple is doing it in a two-parter. You can watch this first part of this 8-episode series on Apple TV. And to my remembrance, what the series does that's different from the novel is that it goes back and forth in time. So we see Sunja as an older woman, a grandmother, and we also see her teenage self and her young adult self. And we see her in relation to her grandchildren, one of whom is very involved in the financial industry, Solomon Bake. And also we get to see how her life evolves over time and how her family evolves over time and all the adaptations that she makes, not only in terms of the culture and being in Japan where the Koreans are oppressed and discriminated against and treated very badly and treated like outcasts, but also adapting to modern times. And, this is the 80s, and the 1980s is also the time where we have the, tragedies associated with HIV/AIDS. And so Min Jin Lee has brought in many of the historical currents of the times as you travel through the life of Sunja in this series, this based on her novel. And we have key characters are the today's or more contemporary Sunja is played by Yoon Ya-jung, who was the first Asian to be awarded the Academy's Best Supporting Actress Award for her role in Minari in 2021. Playing the teenage Sunja is Kim Min-ah, and playing the role of the wealthy businessman is Lee Min-ho, who is a globally recognized actor, singer, model, and I believe he's also now engaged in doing producing as well. He plays Ko Han-soo, who seduces Sunja. And then we also have playing a key role as Sunja's grandson, Jin-ha, who plays Solomon Bek. And this is a very, I will describe a scene that moved me a lot in the series. And Sunja comes from a very poor family. Even in Korea, they are people who struggle to survive, work very hard, and her mother even takes in workers as a way of, it's almost like a boarding house, but they have a couple of rooms, so people are sharing space. And Sunja also goes to the market regularly. In fact, that's where she meets Ko Han-soo. But when Isaac decides that he is going to marry Sunja, her mother negotiates with a local rice merchant to buy a very, very expensive rice that she wants her daughter and her new son-in-law to have as their wedding meal. And the rice is so particular to their home, but also so fine that the rice seller doesn't really want to sell it to her because it's the one he puts aside for his best customers who are able to pay a great price for this rice. But the mother tells him the story. This is her daughter, and she wants her daughter to have one last taste of home. And so she buys the rice, and you see her, washing it several times and preparing the rice and putting it in the bowls. And she brings it in to her daughter and her son-in-law. She doesn't even join them for the meal. She's not even going to taste this rice. But when Sunja dips her spoon in and puts the rice in her mouth and realizes this is her last taste of home, it's a very, very moving scene, because I think particularly this understanding for me is that where I have my food and my music, that can make home for me. And to know that that's something that her mother gives her as a gift and a parting gift, and the understanding that this is a big change that's happening for both of them. And the fact that her mother would sacrifice and give the best of what she could to her daughter, who is leaving home to go to this strange new place and this strange new life. So Pachinko is a very, it's an epic kind of novel. It's one of those that really puts you in the time and place of what Koreans experienced during the Japanese occupation. And I learned things. I learned that Koreans, at least up until the time of this novel, even if you were a Korean born in Japan, you had to register to stay in the country. You had to get you. In a sense, you were never really a citizen. You were always treated like the foreigner, and so it's a very eye-opening novel in terms of the history of Korean and Japanese relations. And it was a book that I loved, and that's why I was drawn to watching the series. I don't, I've had too many times, I guess some of you may have shared this, where you're kind of disappointed in
that's the risk.
Translation from the book to especially movies. I think that series have more time to kind of stretch out, and maybe they don't have to make as many composite characters or leave out things that were significant to the readers. And we all have things that are our favorites. But for me, what I do is I treat the book and I treat the film or the dramatic series as separate creations. And that way, I'm less disappointed if the adaptation to the screen doesn't necessarily meet my expectations or put in all the things that or characters or scenes that were my favorites from the book. So that's a little bit about Pachinko. Again, it's available on Apple TV Part 1, and I understand there is a Part 2 that will be coming out probably sometime in either early to mid 2024.
Yeah, we're keeping posted. And as someone who has more than one kind of rice in my kitchen, I totally relate to. There is a difference. There is a difference to the taste. So, our next book, Killers of the Flower Moon, which I've just started reading, hearing so much about the film that's coming out in October by Martin Scorsese. It premiered in Cannes this year. This is a nonfiction book. It's a history book, and the author is David Grann. So the complete title for the book is Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI. And this story takes place in Oklahoma. Because I'm just getting into it, I'm going to pretty much share the book description with you, so listeners, you'll get a sense of the story here. So this takes place in the 1920s primarily, but the author gives you a background history to how we get to where we are now in this story, this real life story. And in the 1920s, the richest people per capita in the world were members of the Osage Nation in Oklahoma. After oil was discovered beneath their land, they were riding chauffeured automobiles, built mansions, and sent their children to study in Europe. Okay. Then one by one, mysteriously, maybe not so mysteriously, the Osage began to be killed off. The family of an Osage woman, Molly Burkhart, became a prime target. And one of her relatives was shot, another was poisoned, and it was just the beginning as more and more Osage were dying under mysterious circumstances, and many of those who dared to investigate the killings were themselves murdered. So as the death toll rises, a newly created Federal Bureau of Investigation, known as the FBI, took up the case, and its young director, J. Edgar Hoover, who actually is from D.C., which is where we are now, turned to a former Texas Ranger named Tom White to try to unravel the mystery. An undercover team was put together, including a Native American agent who infiltrated the region and together with the Osage began to expose one of the most chilling conspiracies in American history. So let's start with the film. The film features Leonardo DiCaprio. Lily Gladstone, who has black feet, is playing the role of Molly Burkhart. And it includes Robert De Niro, Brendan Fraser, and John Lithgow. Stellar cast, stellar director. I know no one's going to miss this.
And when is it coming out
And
again?
it's coming out in October. There's going to be a theatrical release followed by streaming on Apple TV. Apple TV is one of the producers. What's very interesting, let's bring this up to what we call Mirror of the Present. David Grann's book has already stirred controversy in Oklahoma over teaching the history of Native peoples in public schools. The Oklahoma State Legislature passed a bill, a House Bill 1775, a law that limits discussion of race, sexuality, and gender in the classroom, or themes that will make students uncomfortable. Okay? And this started with an English teacher, not the bill, but in relation to this book. It started with an English teacher in Dewey, Oklahoma, who said she would not assign David Grann's book featuring the story about the Osage because she felt it would upset students and violate the new law. So teachers are in this weird position of self-censoring themselves, of assigning books or recommending books, libraries as well, for fear of losing their jobs or even the schools losing some kind of accreditation. Okay? So members of the Osage Nation Congress in Oklahoma have called on the Oklahoma State Legislature to repeal House Bill 1775. So I personally am looking forward to both the film, reading this book, which, by the way, I've started reading it, and yes, it makes me angry. But history is not meant to make us feel good all the time or good about ourselves. It's to inform us about how we got here and who we are and why things are the way they are today and what can we learn from it. So I'm looking forward to seeing the impact of this film in light of what's going on in terms of public libraries and public schools and books and materials being withheld or taken away, taken out of classrooms and libraries. I'm looking forward to seeing what impact Killers of the Flower Moon, the film, will make on these efforts and the efforts for students to be informed about their real history and for not erasing the histories of people like the Osage Nation and others. So that's my bit for Killers of the Flower Moon, recommended.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of the books that we are reading these days start somewhere in the early 20th century. I'm thinking about that book and the next one we're talking about, The Color Purple, and another one, the one that we'll also speak about, A Gentleman in Moscow.
Yeah, I get the feeling most of these books are probably on those lists, so to speak. But yes, I'm pulling up my copy of The Color Purple here. This is a first edition copy that I was very excited about even before it showed up in bookstores. There was a lot of noted buzz about it. And there's Alice Walker's signature, which I collected or asked her to sign the book at a music concert called Sister Fire. Charles Kuralt attended that concert. He had a good time.
It was a festival.
It was a festival.
Yeah, Women's Music Festival.
Yeah, I invited Billy Taylor, and he told Charles Kuralt, and Charles Kuralt showed up, and people said he was having a great time. So that's a memory. We have a couple of memories of being in the company of Alice Walker, through Busboys and Poets here in Washington, D.C., and Eatonville Restaurant, which was the Zora Neale Hurston themed restaurant. So I always have in my head seeing Alice and our mother sitting on the couch and talking together. So, but let's get to The Color Purple. The musical. The Broadway musical has been adapted into a film, and that's coming out in theaters in December, close to the holidays or on Christmas Day. And let's just be, clear. This musical film is based on the Broadway musical, which was based on the book. And you can still see the feature film version of the book, which was directed by Steven Spielberg with music by Quincy Jones. It came out in 1985. The book, like Daisy Jones and the Six, even though The Color Purple came out before Daisy Jones and the Six, it was published in 1982, also takes that approach of not being in that narrative format. The story is told through a series of letters spanning 20 years, first from Celie to God, and then Celie and her sister Nettie. So the letters are the heart of the book and these adaptations, as the story is set in the early 1900s or 20th century, before we had recording devices that were available to everybody.
And texting and email.
Okay? So here's the story. The Color Purple depicts the lives of African American women in early 20th century rural Georgia. Separated as girls, sisters, Celie and Nettie sustained their loyalty to their hope in each other across time, distance, and then their silence. The Color Purple broke the silence around domestic and sexual abuse. It was narrating the lives of these women through their pain and struggle, their companionship, and growth, resilience, and bravery. So it's a community of women in the story. This is an epic story, and
we tend to like epics, I think.
Yeah, we both read this book. Yeah, these are epic stories. All of these stories are epic stories, spanning, across years and relationships.
With iconic characters.
With iconic characters that you will not forget. So let's talk about what's coming up in December, the musical. So the cast features Fantasia. How many of you remember her from American Idol? Well, she spent 2 years in the Broadway cast, and she was part of the national tour as well. So she will be
reprising her role
as Celie again. Halle Bailey. Hey, she's getting a lot of buzz now with The Little Mermaid. She is the young Nettie. She's in the film. Then DC's Taraji P. Henson. Woohoo, Howard. You know.
Okay.
Okay. Different generation. Okay. Suge Avery. And she will be in the film. Also, Corey Hawkins, Ellington, my high school, will be playing a Harpo. Daniel Brooks is Sophia. Coleman Domingo is Mr. Louis Gossett Jr. is Old Mr. And one of your classmates, is that David Allen Greer from University of Michigan?
Oh, I didn't realize David's in it as well.
Huh. Yeah.
And let's not forget, I believe Ciara is playing the adult Nettie.
Yes.
So we have 2 actresses playing Nettie.
Yes. What's exciting for me also about this film is that it's directed by Blix Bazawuli, who directed the film The Burial Kojo, which was released through Ava DuVernay's Array on Netflix. So he was born in Ghana. He lives in New York. He's also known as Blitz the Ambassador. He's a rapper. He's a writer. He's a director. He's all that and a bag of chips, as they say.
Yeah, multi-talented.
And the screenplay is by Marcus Gardley, who's also a playwright. And he wrote for the series The Chi. Did I say that correctly? It's not the Chi, it's the Chi, Chicago. Chi-town. The music and soundtrack are by the original Broadway composers, Brenda Russell, Allie Willis, Stephen Bray, and added to this for this film version is Chris Bowers, who composed the soundtrack for the film Chevalier, which we've talked about on this podcast.
Yes.
So another resource, if you want to read about Alice Walker's journey with the color purple to the page, to the screen in 1985, that is, her journals, Gathering Blossoms Under Fire, is available. And it was edited by the late Valerie Boyd, who was a biographer for Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston was a Harlem Renaissance writer. If you want to see a film version of it now, you can stream the 1985 adaptation of the book, directed by Steven Spielberg, music by Quincy Jones and Rod Temperton, with the cast that includes Whoopi Goldberg as Celie, Danny Glover as Mr., Kusua Bosia as Nettie, Oprah Winfrey, Margaret Avery as Suge, and you can also listen to the soundtrack, which actually produced some popular singles. Miss Celie's Blues, with lyrics by Quincy Jones and Lionel Richie. Get that, music by Quincy Jones and Rod Temperton. That became kind of a little quasi-hit for a bit. And then you could hear sometimes on gospel radio stations from the 1985 film, Maybe God is Trying to Tell You Something. And Andre Crouch was one of the writers for that song. Also, if you remember Taquiena, remember the controversy that the film raised when it came out in 1985?
Yeah, we talk a lot about representation, and representation sometimes can be really sensitive, particularly if you don't have many opportunities to put your stories out. And then that one film, that one television series, that one streaming series has to, quote unquote, represent the group's total experience, and it always has to be positive representation. I think we're beginning to move past that. But when The Color Purple was released, one of the criticisms was that it negatively depicted Black men. And what's interesting is what Alice was really trying to portray was the impact of patriarchy and sexism. But you talked a little bit, Michon, also about how the book and the film differ in terms of what you called a redemption
Yeah.
thread.
But I'm glad you bring up patriarchy, because I remember for a while I would ask men, do you feel oppressed by patriarchy? It's especially younger men would say, yes, yes. But yeah, I think in the book, the redemption theme is definitely much more prominent than it's suggested in the film, or it's subtle in the film. And we know that nuance just sometimes doesn't work with most audiences. So I think people didn't get that. If you didn't read the book, you wouldn't probably understand what was happening in terms of Mister's. I mean, this is
right. His role in connecting the sisters
and fixing what he felt he broke.
Yeah.
So I that's a conversation I'm looking forward to having about the musical, and seeing how the musical handles that as well as the other stories in it. So we are, very excited about seeing this version of The Color Purple, and it will be out in theaters in December. Now, we have our last book, which is a preview because Taquiena has read it. I haven't. I have it on my bookshelf. I'm going to hold it up. Taquiena,
Yes.
you will talk about A Gentleman in Moscow, but we wouldn't even have read this book had we not done a podcast about All Creatures Great and Small.
Right. Yes. It was Ben Vanstone, who's the showrunner for All Creatures Great and Small, and is also prominently connected with the adaptation of Amor Towles' novel, A Gentleman in Moscow. That novel was published in 2016, but when we talked to Ben Vanstone and I heard him describe it, I said, "Oh, okay, that sounds like something I'd be interested in reading." And I was drawn into the book from the first chapter. It takes place, it starts off in 1922. It's kind of another one of those epic novels because actually it takes you through many decades of the life of Count Alexander Rostov, who is exiled to a grand hotel called the Metropole. This is after the Russian Revolution, and the Count, being an aristocrat, is assumed to be, on the wrong side. But his redemption was that there is a poem that he is attributed to have written that was favorable to the revolution and the proletariat. So they decide, instead of sending him off to the work camps or executing him, that they will exile him to the Metropole Hotel, which is a grand hotel. Of course, he has to give up his lovely room that he is used to having when he would come to the hotel and put into basically, kind of a cold attic, a cramped attic with a bunch of storage space. But this Count, when you talk about making lemonade from lemons, he is still able to transform the space and to some degree continue to find pleasure and beauty and connection and deep social relationships in his exile. And the story takes an interesting turn when he meets a girl who is actually the daughter of one of the now, state officers who also stays at the hotel. And she introduces him to the secret passages that he doesn't know about. And she helps him see how it's those workers who, it's not that he was some kind of like really mean snob or anything, but, he kind of like, he was an aristocrat. He kind of took his life for granted. And she helps him see all the work that goes into making the experience of the hotel happen. And from that relationship, later he comes to become the surrogate father of this girl's daughter. And you see this relationship evolve over time, and you see all the ways that the revolution doesn't necessarily produce the kind of equality and equity and change that the revolutionaries dreamed about. And so you see the hardships that people are struggling with during this time in, now it's former Soviet Union, but at the time it was going from formerly Russia to the Soviet Union. And so it's a book that really transported me into that world, into that time. The 1920s is a favorite historical period for me anyway. I like reading literature, books and novels and history about that time. But I really felt that while I was reading that book, I was totally in that world. And the Count is a really engaging person, and you really learn to love all of the hotel staff as well, and also root for them when, of course, the government's going to send in somebody who is going to try to change things and is resentful of the kind of people like the Count, and is going to like count every bean that they, use, and every fork and knife and spoon and napkin, et cetera, et cetera. And just watching how they get around all of that. And they really become a family. The concierge, the hotel manager, the chef, who is like, our stereotype of many chefs is like the general of the kitchen, and doesn't take too kindly to people making changes, but appreciates people like the Count who can tell down to the most subtle hint of an ingredient what is in a dish and what makes that dish special. So it's a real charming read, but also one that you will get a sense of what it was like to live through those social and political changes through the decades in the former Soviet Union. It's my understanding that hopefully that production will be coming out Showtime, Paramount. I think Paramount bought Showtime.
Yeah, Paramount Showtime.
Sometime in 2024, Ewan McGregor is cast as the Count, and I can really see him in that role. And there's a scene in the book that, again, for me, speaks to what does home mean? I don't know if they'll include it in the series, but it's a relationship that the Count forms with one of the workers who I believe mainly is involved with making sure the boilers and, all of the pipes and the plumbing, et cetera, work. But this worker has a beehive on the roof of the Metropole. And they get into a conversation about how you can tell where the bees have been by the kind of flavors that they bring from the pollen that goes into the flavor of the honey. And there's a time when the bees depart and they're away for a long time and they're not sure if they'll ever return. And when they do return, they bring back the pollen from the trees where the Count's estate was located. And so again, how do we connect with home? That's one of those little touches in the novel that really, for me, I found very meaningful in terms of home and memory and how we hang on to what's good in life. So those are our 5 reads, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens on the screen with these books that we both are enjoying.
I just want to add about A Gentleman in Moscow. They are in production in England, and there are a couple of pictures that have made their way up on social media or on the internet. You can see Ewan McGregor in a mustache and some snowflakes. So things are chugging along, and we're looking forward to seeing the final when it's released. Yes, those are our 5 books, and we are excited to share them with you, and we hope that you will add one or more to your summer reading list, or maybe you've read them already. Tell us what you're looking forward to watching from this list of films and dramatic series. You can write to us at podcast@michonbostongroup.com.
You can also find more information about the books mentioned in the podcast on our webpage, michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters. And support the podcast by purchasing books from our affiliate bookstore using the links that you'll find on the webpage. Share this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters with someone you know who would enjoy this conversation. Subscribe to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters and enjoy past episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
We'll be back after our summer hiatus with new episodes of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. In the meantime, you can enjoy past podcast episodes you may have missed or want to listen to again. Sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future episodes and bonus content.
Follow us on social media for updates. Our Instagram handle is @Historical Drama Sisters. On Facebook, we are Historical Drama Boston Sisters. Like and share Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters on your social media.
This is Michon Boston.
And this is Taquiena Boston.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast about historical films and series dramas. Visit our webpage at michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters.
Tell us what historical dramas you're watching. Who knows? We may do a show about it. Sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with the people you know who binge on historical drama.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters is brought to you by the Michon Boston Group. The views and opinions expressed on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters are those of the speakers and do not represent the positions or views of the Michon Boston Group, its clients, or affiliates. This is Michon Boston.
And this is Taquiena Boston. Thank you for listening.